Good morning, and Admiral Joe, we've got a microphone here, and also the news media has a recorder here, so if you could speak from this area, that would be very helpful. Good morning, everybody. I'm Rob Hogue, State Senator here from Senate District 33, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to our climate conversation with this morning's special guest, retired Admiral, former Congressman, presidential candidate Joe Sestak. And it's great to be with you. Let me just say a couple things here. First of all, I've got a couple people in the audience I want to introduce, so that one of the things we're trying to do is build local involvement with the groups that are working on climate change, which I consider the defining challenge of the 21st century. So I've got a couple people that I'd like to introduce. Phil Engen with the Local Citizens Climate Lobby Group. They meet the second Saturday of every month. We've got Jason Snell here, who's with the Sunrise Movement locally. The Sunrise Movement meets the first weekend of every month, Saturday or Sunday, depending on what day they choose.
It'll be Sunday.
It's Sunday, July 7th, so this Sunday they're meeting at 6 p.m. at New Pioneer. Joe Wilkinson, I want to introduce with the Iowa Wildlife Federation. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Just really want to encourage people to be involved. We've had really good participation from people with Iowa 350 and also the Sierra Club and other climate advocacy groups. Let me just say a little bit about the climate issue because, look, my number one goal for 2020 is to replace Donald Trump with somebody who will be halfway reasonable. That's my number one priority. We've got to stop this mess for our country. But we also need a presidential candidate who will lead on the climate issue because it is big and it is urgent. We need a candidate who has personal understanding of the issue. One of the things I remind people of many times when, I wasn't a fan of the climate debate until I watched the last debate. And it was so superficial and short that I said to myself, we really do need a climate debate to start to get into this issue. And in the absence of that, we're having this series. And I think this is a good series. All the candidates have been invited. But it's about more than just clean energy, too. It is about natural resources. It is about immigration. It is about health care. It is about our economy. It is about disaster relief and recovery, and that is something in Cedar Rapids, and the Admiral and I will hopefully get some time to talk about the flood experience one-on-one in Cedar Rapids in 2008. But as somebody who's been concerned about climate change since I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa, go Hawks, my life was forever changed in June of 2008. When Cedar Rapids, which had never had a flood stage above 21 feet on our Cedar River, went more than 10 feet higher, over 31 feet. 5,000 homes were displaced. People were evacuated from 5,000 homes. 1,000 businesses, churches, and other nonprofits were flooded. And virtually every major facility of city and county government, including our jail, our police station, our sheriff's department, our fire station, and the only facility that really wasn't flooded was the emergency management office, which a month before the flood had moved from the basement of Mays Island to Kirkwood Community College on top of a hill because they thought that was a safer place for emergency management. And about a month before the flood, they completed that move. So this is a reality for Iowans. It's a reality for Americans, for people around the world who are dealing with it. Obviously, we need a candidate who can bring America together to address this issue. And not just domestically, but we also need a candidate who will help lead around the world. It is my honor to introduce, by the way, Admiral Joe, if you haven't been to the National Czech and Slovak Museum, we'll have to get you there on a future visit. Slovak heritage, so welcome to Cedar Rapids. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy who had a 30-year naval career. A two-term member of Congress, 2007 to 2011, representing a district in southeastern Pennsylvania, where after defeating a Republican incumbent a 96% lifetime League of Conservation voting records. It's my honor to introduce to you Admiral Joe Sestak. Thank you, Admiral.
Just one thing on my Slovak blood. I was working with President Clinton one time, and Vice President Gore was going to welcome the foreign minister, the new foreign minister of Slovakia, named Sestak. And I guess they called me up and said, "Hey, can you meet the gentleman with the same name?" And so we could tell him we also have one here. So as we met him, he said, "Oh, Sestak, that's like the name Smith in America." And I had gone back when it was still communist, and backpacked through all of Eastern Europe. But it's a beautiful place, and I got more emails probably from people around America and Slovak heritage than anybody else when I announced. I'm honored to be here to talk about the most destructive threat that there is to mankind. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, though. 3 or 4 minutes that actually leads up to the very first issue that I talk about in my announcement video, which is climate change. So I wore the cloth of this station for over 31 years, in peace and war, from the Vietnam and the Cold War era to Afghanistan and Iraq and the emergence of China. Well, I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. I grew up in this global canvas of service in the United States Navy. My commitment to service actually came from my parents. My pop was a dreamer. He emigrated with his parents as a young boy from Slovakia here to America. He served from the kamikaze attacks and landings against Germany throughout World War II in the Navy. Came home, continued his service. But so did my mom, as they raised 8 kids together, because she served our nation for 30 years as a high school math teacher. I tell everyone, education is our real homeland defense. So my commitment came from them, and from them I learned integrity's values. By watching them live, service to others, to country, above self, and accountability in answering for oneself. And that's how the Navy raised me. It's how they prepared me for increasing responsibility and command at sea. But also, when I was ashore, sending me off first for a doctorate at Harvard University, that was generally economics and national security. And then, as I came ashore, rotating seashore, when I was ashore, they were assigning me to increasing positions of policy, working with General Colin Powell when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to do political, military, and economic assessments. Then, coming ashore again, I went to work for President Clinton at the White House, Director of Defense Policy, the one who coordinated our national security strategy, one that brought together the power of our economy with the power of our diplomacy, including the power of our ideals and our military, but also the limitations upon it, so that people would understand militaries might fix a problem. Militaries might stop a problem. They never fix a problem. If anyone thinks we fixed Iraq, please raise your hand. If we had fixed the illiteracy rate of women in Afghanistan, when I was on the ground there, at the very beginning of the war, for a very brief period, we would have done more, because it was 95%, to fix the global war of terror than our courageous soldiers are still trying to do after 17 years of war to stop it. Later I was the 3-star admiral in charge of our warfare, a $350 billion 5-year plan for what we buy or don't buy in the Navy. So I proposed a fairly controversial plan, no longer to have an objective of 375 ships. We didn't need them any longer. We needed about 260, I proposed, and got it submitted to Congress. It was to walk away from force structure and understand that the future was going to be owned by whomever best harnessed cyberspace. It proved to go against the grain of long-held assumption that numbers, capacity, is actually a measure of prowess in the military, when in actuality, it is actually a force posture where you were placed, and the type of ability to command the commons of cyberspace, without which you can no longer command the commons of the sea, which is why the 4-star admiral of the Pacific has now said, who used to work for me, we no longer command the Western Pacific. The first loss of command of the sea since World War II to China that the Navy has ever lost. because of that and called for cyberspace and other capability out there. It was a good lesson, though, because it went up against the ingrained assumptions of a military-industrial congressional complex that really did have their own interest at heart rather than the nation's. If there's something we really need to do, is to reform our military also at less cost and much greater capability than today. But I walked out of the Pentagon one day, and shortly after I came out, the plane on 9/11 dove into the building. I hurried back. I spent that night on the hill above the Pentagon, looking down at that burning scar on the Pentagon, but also our nation. I was called a day or two later and told to establish the Navy's strategic anti-terrorism unit. The world had changed. And I was sent for a very brief period, as I mentioned, on the ground in Afghanistan, meeting with SEALs in broken down farmhouses, trying to assess new rules of engagements for extraordinarily high-tech air power for this very different global war of terror on the ground. When I came out, I was given the highest honor this nation can give to anyone, to be asked to lead your sons and daughters in harm's way. Our 10,000 SEALs, Marines, and sailors, the average age of the 5,000 sailors on an aircraft carrier, 19 and a half, running a nuclear reactor, fixing your plane, and never a question when you get in, just a mere salute. If anyone doesn't think the youth of America is great, come aboard an aircraft carrier.
That's right.
When we arrived, though, in the Arabian Sea, we saw what I had observed wherever I served this nation in this global canvas of the United States Navy, because waiting there for us to become part of America's battle group was an international armada. The Japanese were there, who had not been outside the Sea of Japan since my father fought them in the World War II. And alongside them was Germany. Countries had sent ships from all over the globe. Canada came from across the Atlantic. Australia came from the Pacific. But the Italian Minister of Defense said it well for why they all had come. Some may think, he said, that we Italians are better lovers than warriors. But America has been attacked, and we will be there for them. We have the world with us against evil. Because there in that distant sea was the realization that America's greatest power is its power to convene, to bring together nations and peoples of the world for a common cause that serves us all. And that is what the world's greatest generation has done. Ever since they returned home from fighting the second of the world's 2 world wars in 26 years and swore it would never happen again to us a third time. And they kept their promise by building the liberal world order based on individual and human rights, open and fair markets, fair and just governments, and one that embraced the world's collective goods. Whether it was Stalinism or human rights atrocities, dire poverty, or world recessions, they convened the world in multilateral organizations and arrangements. And by bringing together nations that had those same values under our leadership, we all became safer, stronger, healthier, and more prosperous with our freedoms. And we won the Third World War, the Cold War, without a shot. And that is why our retreat from the world is so dangerous to our American dream and harmful to this world. If there's any doubt about what I'm about to say, it evaporates because of why we are here today. There should be no doubt that this global concord is the absolute prerequisite to our continuing safety, health, prosperity, our way of life. It is one that no matter what we do by ourselves, it won't matter. There is no way without the world that we can stop the most disastrous threat, the most harmful threat, the most destructive threat to mankind that has ever risen. That in a decade we'll begin a slow implosion of our world into crises. of violent wars and desperate seeding of limited resources, drought and famine leading to conflict, economic shock to poor and rich alike, and the bankruptcy of the idea that governments around the world could actually provide for the general welfare of their people as the inexorable rise of global heat and warming. Oceans takes a harsh toll on citizens no longer protected by their governments. Even if someone were to achieve the new Green Deal and its wonderful goals, let's say even in a decade, it won't matter if that's all we do. You know as well as I, it's only 15% of the world's global emissions reduction that we have to achieve in order to disarm that catastrophic threat before it explodes upon us. Take any one of the 194, the 196 nations in the UN Convention on Climate Change that have not yet met even the unacceptable low national commitments of the Paris Accord. Saudi Arabia, it will use as much oil to as much energy to power its air conditioning in 2030 as it exports in oil today. Yes, I am a strong believer that the reason that sculpture that is in Washington, D.C., that sits closest to the Oval Office today is not of an American. It was consciously put there of a foreigner, the man who stood beside George Washington, convincing a reluctant George Washington to march south from New York City all the way down to Yorktown. And then General Rochambeau commanded American troops to help win that battle of freedom for us. And because of that, he sits there closest than any other in Washington, D.C. today, to remind us that without our allies and friends, we cannot preserve our American dream. I'm a large proponent of having us do a carbon fee and rise it each year. There's no other way that we can use something effectively and efficiently and as rapidly to start to decrease the carbon emissions we have. And then we give it back to the citizens, but we also must have money to go up, particularly in direct air capture, which is expensive. It may cost us right now somewhere between $1 or $2, maybe $500 per ton. But there is no other way to meet the commitment unless we can take out of the air what is there or we may continue to put up there. And we must bring that from the fees gotten from the polluters into the research and development, because every study has said there is no other way. And then you can step back and say, when I speak about the world, this year the Kigali Treaty Agreement went into effect. And as all of you know, we've never signed it or ratified it. And yet we gave developed nations the permission that this hydrofluorocarbon type of threat that we have, where it's 1,000 times worse than a CO2 particle from air conditioning. And we haven't even signed up. So what does that mean? Step back. 8% of the tropics today have air conditioning. And you all know that the only reason China became the sweatshop of productivity was once they got air conditioning in their southern provinces. When you become middle class, the first thing you get is a cell phone. The second thing you get is air conditioning. In 10 years, 2030, I think it is 2035, Africa will have more youth who have moved into working age than the rest of the world. They will have 40% of the world's population by the end of this century. And you don't think they're going to buy air conditioning? And so if you don't establish the standards for the world, so that you have the most efficient, effective air conditioning today, which is 1/3 less electricity it uses, then you will have this world just continue and mandate it and work it internationally to have this catastrophic threat happen. And as global warming happens, people are going to want to use air conditioning more. So it's one of the many doodle loops that are out there. You can step back and see how you can try, if you want to try to do BECCS. Got it. But that's 1/3 of arable land today. And the challenge of bringing that off is not going to match what we can do in these other areas. Do I believe that we have to change our consumer activities? Without a question. A smartphone, not only that it's over $1,000 for iPhone, but we should be going to Fairphones and others to where we have to understand repair, just not consume, is a mandatory part of it. This is the largest challenge, I get it, we've ever had. But unless this nation has a leader who actually understands in breadth and depth the world and actually can bring the world about, it won't matter what we do here by ourselves. As I go into the questions, and I'm happy to go through every single instance of how we can improve climate change here, but we have to keep in mind that as we come home, leaving bruised allies behind, telling them it's a wrap, not only is there another illiberal world order emerging that produces much more CO2 than we do, China, but also is bent upon imposing the illiberal values of might makes right. I backpacked through China also. I didn't get married at 47, so couldn't convince anybody. But, so I was in between military leave. I backpacked the first year they let independent travel through China. Flew into Beijing, came out in Hong Kong weeks later. I wish I was as popular today in politics where I was in Wuhan and Chongqing. Hundreds of people would follow me, never having seen a Caucasian before. They had just opened up the industrial heartland, or wasn't industrial at that time. That country is to be respected, but not on the values that they are imposing, as they will build 1,600 around the world coal plants in the next decade. I'll end just by saying, as John F. Kennedy said in that wonderful speech on the House floor, the hour is late, but the agenda is long. And you need someone who also understands that we can't do what we did in New York City, taking 12 years to build at their 2nd Avenue subway spot. To go 3 more stops is how long it took them to do the construction. To build a wall to save New York City, it would take 30 years of the way we do it today. We have to go back in time and remember, we won. We actually won a world war in 4 years. As everybody talks about the wonderful way we mobilized for the world and what we need for climate change. But remember, we couldn't even roll out a website in 4 years. This government needs someone who actually understands it, whether it's from Congress, the White House, the military Pentagon, but also understands the world, because the hour is late. And this is the most destructive threat we have. We need someone who's willing to be accountable, whether it's in the Navy, to what must be done to reduce our force structure and go against it, or even to run against my president and everyone else. When my party accepted our inspector, the man who humiliated Anita Hill in the hearings, it would be accepted today in the Me Too generations, but I never forgot my 6 sisters, professionals, and how they humiliated. It needs someone who's actually willing to be accountable for oneself, but also the people, above party, above self, and above any special interest, or we're not going to make it. And connect execute something in the government to make it run and bring this world together. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Admiral Joe, for that message. And I'm going to ask the first question, and then as I ask that first question, if people think of things they'd like to ask, we'll have about 20 minutes for questions, and then we'll have some time at the end for people to visit one-on-one with Admiral Joe. One of the things you talked about, and I'm going to challenge you just a little bit here, you talked about a future where the climate problem is exploding on us. That was the phrase you used, which I don't disagree with. But part of the challenge right now is that we already have the issue exploding on us. I mean, it is already exploding us, and we'll talk more later today about the flood of 2008, and the good news there was nobody died. But you know, Iowa has been hammered again by flood damage. This year, you had Pacific Junction, a town on western Iowa that was underwater for over 80 days. You look at Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. You look at the wildfires in Paradise and other communities in California. And you also have this happening around the world. I mean, we just had 1 million people in Japan evacuated due to record flooding. I'd like you to discuss what you've experienced in terms of seeing disaster damage that's climate related and how that has affected your views.
Thanks for the question. You would be amazed at how much the United States military does. We pull into a port in Egypt just before we go to the Portugal, to our last port visit, before we go to the Persian Gulf, to sit there often at sea 4 or 5 months without pulling into a port. That first day, we all go over. The entire ship who is not on duty, and actually does a reclamation project for the government. In that case, it was an orphanage. But in Australia, when I pulled in there, it was due to damage. I remember it was a storm. I don't remember what it was, but we went there. Didn't matter whether it was St. Lucia. I told Lily out here, this place is beautiful. I mean, I ran in 3 parades the last 2 days, and I run in parades. I shake every hand. 35,000 brochures passed out as I had guys and gals going down, passing around, saying, hey, that's me, take me home, you know? And going, and it's great. Then I went to the beautiful river, Raccoon River. Do I have it right? Well, that's down in Des Moines, okay? And it's gorgeous and all. People have no concept of what it's like overseas. I went to the homeless shelter here to visit my fellow Navy vets. Pretty tough down there. But it's nothing compared to what you see. They live this all the time. My wife works overseas in international environmental affairs. From Mozambique to Kazakhstan, she's been on this issue. And at times I flew over just to see it with her. And here's the real downside. As much as you talk about this, it happens to them all the time. Sudan and other places. One thing I did when I left, I turned down what 450 senators and congressmen did not, since 1998, a lobbying job. When I told my wife what I was offered, and they're 6 and 7 figures, she put her hand on my shoulder and said, are you sure? Jokingly, I think. But the issue is I went and brought together First Global, to his point. It was the first robotics inter-all-girl Olympics ever done. I got Iran in. I got an all-girls Muslim team because I was on the ground there. I don't just say those words, that you need to fix the illiteracy rate. I got them in through the Peace Institute to lead the parade. They came from Sudan, all on President Trump's ban list for across from the White House. But every time I talked to them, they would say and talk, not all of them, but many of them, the devastation, the horror. I said, what's it like there? Mali, you name it, they go through it. I'll stop. But please understand, they're already feeling it out there. And it started long ago. But your United States military does not just go there to help out. Your embassies in Africa have more military assigned to their embassy in Africa than diplomats, and that's wrong. We are treating this as though it's a military command in there. Yes, we have terrorist threats, but the real threat to America is exactly why he had me speak right now, is the damage that this drought that is happening out there. And in Yemen and other places, humanitarian things, they just expanded into conflict like Bosnia did. And then all of a sudden, we're in another conflict. That's why Jim Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, who I worked with, said, it is going to be, and I don't have the exact words, but it's on my website, it is going to cause your U.S. military to respond to more and more crises. It's all the world or nothing.
Thank you. Let's go. Let's start. We'll go down this line. Those four. Libby. You.
Okay, climate change. Never gets a mention of family planning, overpopulation. What's President Sestak going to do
Yeah,
about
we will have-
international and domestic overpopulation?
No, it's a great point. 2 billion more people by the end of the century, all right? Family planning, I mean, that is why these programs that people are starting to cut, if they also happen to assist in choice, are wrong. Some of them are being taken care of, like China is, they're in a race for time because their population, they're soon going to be like China in a population death spiral because of the single baby policy, which has been changed, but they're not, they have gotten so set to it. So some have taken care of it. But Africa is a prime example. I believe we can try, but we're not going to have much control over that, except to have the programs there that can help educate and also give a woman her right to have a choice, all right? But these economies of ours all understand, just like us, that population means economic growth. And that is why I think we can mitigate it, we can't prevent it. I wish I could tell you yes, but that's why I purposely said at the beginning, of all the technologies I've looked at, CCS, all that stuff, it's only direct air capture. If we continue to produce 2 to 3% GDP growth in the world, by 2015, to her point, that means populations are growing and all, sustainable, we have to produce no more than, I think it's 50 billion metric tons a year or something. We're at 70 right now. It'll be 180. The United States, if everybody comes to the United States capability, it's 4.5 planets we use every year of resources. And everybody wants to be us, and can you blame them? So my issue is we have to have the technology to pull what we put up there in, and either put it back up as fuel and capture it again, or store it as liquid, which DAC is supposedly, and they've proven it. It's not scalable yet, but they've proven it, to put it down in the ground. But I'm immensely supportive of what you say. I just don't know how you are going to tell other countries you can't be like us. Last issue, if I could, on immigration. That's why we should all think about ourselves. Since 1970, American women, citizens, have not been producing. We don't have enough babies each year to, so to speak, take the place of those who pass away. If it were not for immigration of all types, since 1970, we would be in a population death spiral. This immigration issue, it's practically we need them all. And that's the issue. But ma'am, I'm sorry, my assessment is I get it, but if we don't change it, we have a problem. I don't see how successful we're going to be on that. It's going to be hard enough to get them to do the Kigali agreement and all that. Do you want to come back at me on that?
No, we'll talk.
All right.
Let's go to Mary.
Hi, if you go in any big city and at 8 o'clock in the morning, you'll see bumper traffic sitting there for an hour or more, right? And I've been in Minneapolis and I've been through that and was kind of shocked, right? Living in Iowa. Now, like telecommute, right? The technology of telecommuting is tremendous these days.
The which community?
Now I telecommute. I work out of my house.
Telecommute, got it.
I work out of my house.
Yes, ma'am.
And I manage a big production system for a big company, I'm in computing, and we can talk to India in the morning and even have video websites and all of that stuff. How do we bring that technology, which already exists, and I'm saying it exists now, and big companies are using it, but like the federal government and other places are woefully, not doing that, and it's causing problems now. People have spent an hour on the road,
Yes, I touch upon this issue on my website. To your wonderful point, we will have $1 trillion in congestion cost alone in the next decade if we keep our infrastructure, our way we do business, and do nothing. And that's emissions and all that. There is a model that's actually in the government that is not too bad. It's your Veterans Administration. Now, before you ever go with Veterans Administration, there's 3 parts to the VA. And I have to, because every time the VA, it goes like this. One part is they take care of seminaries. Let's forget that, they have cemetery. Second part is the VBA, the Benefits Administration. That's the problem. You can't get in. But just like I met 3 vets, who I just chatted with about the VA, they said, I'm in and I wouldn't change it. The New England Journal of Medicine has rated the VA single payer, the only single payer in America. Medicare is not, as the best in 11 indicators of providing quality health. And a study just came out in 2015 said the same thing. One just came out a month ago. And I know my wife works on a suicide prevention study. She just finished it at the VA. I only bring that up because they do telecommuting more than anyone. The woman who had suicide prevention, the secretary is in New York. It is something that I believe, much like often they bring military people forward to talk about environment, if you could bring the VA as examples to push that. People, in my opinion, like to see if it works. And sometimes they use military because people's image is we work. And so my only thing is, I think you can give incentives for it, but I also think showing what it does in reduction of cost and things like that is probably the way to go. But you're right. I'm surprised they work as well as they do with this telecommunication.
Great, thanks, Admiral. Let's go to Scott, and then we'll go to Jason and then Robin.
Admiral,
Yes,
within
sir.
the context of climate change, can you lay out for us which order of battle is?
Yes, I answered this question the other day also, thank you. The very first thing is, I don't care where I have to fly or anything else, it would be that Paris Accord. I know I should run around and do, no. What I said is, it's whether we bring this world together, I would be there. And I would go to the French president, sculpture happens to be close to the Oval Office, and say, you did it for us once, and you tried, President. Remember he did a couple months ago, and the yellow, remember I think it was his carbon tax or something, I forgot. And I'd say, we've got to with you. And if I have to do a town hall, not just me, I love town halls, particularly when the Tea Parties was out there. And I'd go to I'd do whatever has to be done. I want to cement that first. Because right now, that only gets us 2.5, I think it is, or 3, you know what I mean? It's inadequate. And that's why my website says you have to increase the national commitments. At least you got to bring them together to begin the talk. And then I would come back. And it's the carbon fee that has to. It's the toughest one right away. And it's great, I mean, to throw stuff right away and into the subsidies, but that carbon fee will be the biggest one shot we have. And then to convince, I mean, that's why I run in parades and shake hands. I attend health call. I represent a 2-to-1 Republican district. Second Democrat since the Civil War. Spent $3.5 million to beat that 20-year incumbent Republican. I got reelected. And I raised $3 million. I didn't spend one dime on a campaign ad because of this approach. Get off the bridge, talk to the sailors and domestics. I really believe that. And we have to get that fee passed. That's why it's listed first after the international one. So that's my 1-2 approach. Don't want to do it all? Telecommunicating? Absolutely. But you get those and you start it down because accountability for oneself has to show the rest of the world what we're willing to do.
Great. Jason.
Jason Snell, Sunrise Movement. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your service. I appreciate you talking about how America needs a model for the rest of the world, how to do this. I think that's incredibly important. It can't just be us, but we have to model, the solution. One of the opportunities here in Iowa is how to model better agriculture for the rest of the nation and the rest of the world. One of the struggles that the campaigns are running across is interacting with farmers who are climate deniers. Even though their farms are being devastated by climate change, just fundamentally they don't believe it's from climate change. What would be your approach to districts and farmers,
To what?
To
to
farm.
rural districts and farmers in terms of delivering ideas about how to fix climate change when right off the bat they don't believe it.
Yes. I think, and you're absolutely right, you'll find on my website, I talk about organic and regenerative farming. You need to move them away from tillage. You need to get hedgerows back down there. And you need to move them to understanding that, we can do things like subsidize them to get them to even do trees and things. But the real issue is, you've got to talk to him or her in the proper way. And I think the way that you have to do it is to be, quite frankly, honest, but not pejorative. I don't use the term climate, for me, you're right in this forum here, but to understand that you can actually show him an example or her, that actually they do, for example, you can plant clover in the fall. You can then let it over wintertime, and then use this new machine that has proven itself to actually, the clover dies, it becomes the mulch and everything like that, and you can get that seed down there without it. But you've also gone back to the hedge groves, okay? So that you can, over time, begin to go, you remember there used to be 20, 30 feet between property lines of things, so that the insects and everything that are supposed to be there, give that ecosystem there, that eventually you can even move to the organic type of things. There are, and I'm gonna tell you, the guy who writes my issue paper is an organic farmer. Sometimes I have to show me that fact before I say it, do you know what I mean? And I think there's no other way but almost one by one to do it. Look, I respect this conservatism we have in America. And you're conservative for a reason. In the military, we're conservative because we don't want to lose a war over. But I think then the only way, like I tried to change the Navy to say we could have a less expensive military, is to sit down with the facts. And that, again, is the only way. We have no choice. Look, I'm here because I don't think you can find a comment from me putting down the Republican Party. I represent 2 to 1 public districts. My voting record, as I told you, for Planned Parenthood is NARAL pro-choice 100%. And F from the NRA. But they came to trust me. And I don't think, and that's my worry right now, what you're talking about. We cannot have another president, even if it's Democrat, who can just do executive orders. And the next president rips it out. It is really going to them, and also understanding, like we don't do for the coal miner when he comes out and loses his or her job. You have to, if this is going to impact him, you have got to do one of 2 things: subsidize the transition, or do what we don't do in America. And on my website, I have a proposal for training for a lifetime. In the military, we have the largest community college in America, the U.S. Air Force College. So when a gal uses their job in F-16 because the F-22 come in, we don't kick them out like we do coal miners, where we spend the least of any developed nation in the world on labor. Those men and women who work with their hands and their minds. 0.001% of GDP. And so therefore, if we had this, and there is a transition, or he's got to, at their cost, they go and learn those new skills, and it's subsidized. And like in the military, they don't learn how to do the F-22 maintenance. So you've got to be able to go to him and not just say that coal is, or this tillage is bad. There has to be that concern that this is his livelihood. But I honestly believe there's examples that show that he'll be better off in the longer term by going to some of these other means. It's not a perfect answer, I got it. But you mandate this and just happen, you'll never get this nation together. You have to mandate it with an understanding once they've been explained to it and show that there's some benefit in it for them.
Robin.
Admiral, I understand that the military is the biggest user of fossil fuels. And I wonder if you are not prepared to reduce the footprint of the military. What would your approach be to reducing that overall consumption and contribution to climate change?
Absolutely. As a 3-star admiral, if I was willing to tell them to go from 12 aircraft carriers to 9 and 54 submarines to 35, and that proposal sits in Congress today, I'm not worried about tell them about do something on this if we have to. But the fact of the matter is, and I'd like to get your email and send it to you, that under Secretary Malbus, the Secretary of the Navy, the standards for fuel efficiency is higher in the United States Navy to accomplish than the United States as a whole. You'd be surprised how good. I know my wife, again, she's these people that they got to know her, and she does a lot of work in the, she's done this. So we actually have an environmental, which is about to go away, an environmental office in DOD. We also have one on energy efficiency. And the way it was sold is, hey, Marines, you know all that fuel you're carrying to power your radio? Well, you can carry more bullets if you have a solar power thing, all right? So we have those two shops there. But sir, you're right. But I'll tell you, you go to our bases, every one of them is moving to renewable energy. And I'll take your email and send this stuff to you. They are actually pretty far ahead of it. We had the first green F-18 squadron under Secretary Malbus. Your military, look, when I joined up, 3 miles out at sea, we threw our trash overboard. My gosh, within 10 years, we were compacting it, waiting till we pulled back in port to get rid of it. Now, but we are the big users. We got to get going on it. But sir, I'll send you some facts and figures on it, because I myself am not the latest up on that, but I do know that they're not that bad. They're pretty darn good. Whether they'll accomplish it now, when you actually don't have somebody, I mean, that's the whole thing, my website took so long. It's just not saying it. But now if the boss, the president, is not forcing it, do you know what I mean? Well, then those guys pay attention to something else. And so that's the issue right now. Can I get your email? I'll give you mine, okay?
Right. Well, thank you, Admiral Joe, and that's it for our questions. You have a final, you got any final thoughts you want to share?
Because, yes, sir.
No,
I just want to
You're
wrap.
done, man.
I just want to wrap up in 5 minutes because, I mean, obviously, I'm a new guy on the block. And as some of you know, I didn't get in till late because my daughter had brain cancer. It came back when she was 4 years old. That's why I got out of the military. It wasn't the reason. It was I needed to take care of her. But I was an independent. I became a Democrat, went back and ran a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district. And I ran on a mantra at that time because you gave my daughter the opportunity to live. The first brain operation, they said she had 3 to 9 months to live. We couldn't get in the military. So I ran on the mantra. I'm a retired Navy admiral in a Republican district, running on national security that begins at home and health security. I took what's now called Romney Care, you know, 2005 Massachusetts plan, because that's when I was running. We didn't even know anything called Obamacare at that time. Stuck on my website, said that's why I'm running. But what I learned during all that time, as we kept our office open 7 days a week to 9 o'clock every night. Bill Walsh, my academy classmate, we grew up in the same district together. Stayed 30 years plus in the military together. He said, Joe, there's carnage coming here. It's not lives. We got to set up a mass unit, their livelihoods. We saved over 800 homes from foreclosures. Finding out years before everyone else that those mortgage companies were rubber stamping those things and not. When we went over and said, we got a waiver, we want to look at the paperwork, they rolled. We saved, handled 4 times history the case of the average congressional office. Yeah, we worked 7 days a week to 9 o'clock every night, rotated 50 interns on our staff. The point is this, I wondered, why isn't a government of the people more accountable to the people? I thought that when you saw Democrats and Republicans alike vote for that tragic misadventure in Iraq, not understand the complexities of the world, or that militaries never fix a problem. They stop them. And we unleash Shia against Sunni, and Sunni against Shia. And former generals of Saddam Hussein then created ISIS, and it metastasized throughout Syria beyond, even copycat killings in Los Angeles. And no one has ever answered for that or the carnage from Wall Street. Not one politician has ever answered for themselves. And that's why your question comes up, that why should they trust some government official come to them and say, yeah, I know we messed up in Iraq. Yeah, I know we messed up. It wasn't me. Yeah, it was you. This nation's biggest deficit is not the debt. It's the trust deficit. This nation is yearning for someone who's willing to be accountable for themselves, for people, over party, over any special interest. The president is not the problem. He is the symptom of the problem. Our Hobson's choice is not just to elect a president. It is to heal our nation's soul. When I launched off my 2015 campaign and held up the boots I wore in Afghanistan, I'm going to walk 422 miles across the state. And I said, we're going to fight for the soul of America. Every county town hall I held, we're no longer there. That fight's been done. We have to heal this nation's soul, or to make what you said so well. If we do not bring together a united America, even when disagreeing well, with someone with the people will trust, to be honest and take the hit when they're wrong, accountable to them, we can't do it. So as I end, you'll sign me on the campaign in late. That more than anything is what we need. Because if we don't bring ourselves together, we cannot meet the defining challenges of our time. And this issue, and you're talking to someone who probably has a darn more progressive, what was called the most progressive congressman in Pennsylvania. I didn't look at it as progressive, I looked at it as practical. Everybody in the military has health care. You can't get promoted when I left it to be an officer unless you have a master's degree, or a senior enlisted unless you have an associate's degree. We were just implementing that. Women get equal pay to men. You get a pension. And then I'd stop and I'd say, when I ran the first time, everybody in the military is a Democrat. They just don't realize it. But as I am, the story I leave you with is this. And Rob, you're kind to give me my final thing. And I do want to sign a pledge in front of you, because the fossil fuel, I've already said I'm not taking money from corporations, not to give it to me anyway. But, and executive, if you don't mind, I can sign it. But the story I asked you is, I asked you to come aboard an aircraft carrier. And to see, amongst those 5,000 19-and-a-half-year-old youth, what this nation most yearns for, Democrat or Republican. When you get in that plane, the pilot sits there and turns on their engines. And then they hook you to a catapult. It's like a sling. And it's like you're sitting in the Kentucky Derby, waiting for that horse bucking, trying to get out. And then they push that button, and that catapult flips you in the air. Walt Disney has nothing over that. I got to tell you. And off you go into the night. But then sometimes, just before they launch that button, they say, stop. Get out of the plane. They need an F-18, not an A-6B over there. And then you see this youth, could be in Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, Des Moines, comes underneath that plane where the pilot can't see. Because no pilot worth their salt is ever going to turn off his or her engines until they know they've been unhooked from that catapult. Because if you turn off your engines and a 19-and-a-half-year-old youth happens to lean against the button, it's a great but a final ride. So that man or woman comes out and unhooks that catapult from the plane. And because the pilot can't see it, he or she walks in front of that plane, looks up, and gives a very simple signal like this, and then doesn't move until he or she, the pilot, shuts off their engines, opens up their canopy, and gets safely on deck. And that youth of America, your son and daughter, out there at 19 years old, has answered to America what we most want by standing there. Go ahead. You can trust me. Because I'm also willing to be accountable. And if I made a mistake, and you start heading overboard to your death because of my mistake, I'm going right with you to my own. Nobody in America believes anybody in Washington, D.C. has or would stand in front of that plane for them. They yearn for that accountability once more than anything, and without it, we will not accomplish what we have to do within a liberal world order arising. The climate change threat that's twice even as bad as that. We'll try to advance what we must, from child care to early education, to family, we need training for a lifetime. And we must do it all because Kennedy said, the hour is late. But our agenda is probably a little longer than his. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Well, with that, we've got a few minutes to visit one-on-one, and do you want to bring that up so you can sign the pledge?
Oh,
And you want to read the pledge to us as you sign it?
good. This is a fossil.
It is the no fossil fuel money pledge.
Yeah, or from executive lobbyist for tax. I already had, I would even take it from corporations, but we'd like me to sign this in front of the group. So we told them to go in front of you. Is that okay? But it's pretty good. I have a book called Restoring the American, Walking Your Shoes, Restoring the American Dream. I didn't update it, but it's not one of those books that says, well, I grew up in a log cabin and ready to be president. It's kind of one of those books that actually, I taught 2 courses, one called Ethical Leadership at 5 universities, college, and started with Cheney University, because when my party, when I ran against on spectrum, we went to the Democratic events in Philly, Pittsburgh, I went to 200 African American churches. That's how I actually began my campaign here. It wasn't for the Women Building Out Baptist Church. Pastor had to be a vet, and did it. But they welcomed me, and so I have a book that says "Walk in Your Shoes," and it's all based on facts. It's like Napoleon said, the big Napoleon, if I were to go to my life, if I were to be in love, I would analyze it bit by bit, because you can't ask how or why enough. So I like signing it because you can sign my book in there as my accountability to accomplish it, and that's what I'm actually doing for them. And so with that, office of presidency, president, thank you very much.